The city was busy that afternoon. Cars moved slowly through the streets and people walked quickly on the sidewalks trying to reach their destinations. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows on the buildings. Among the crowd, one man walked calmly, holding his phone in his hand. His name was David. He was quiet, polite, and focused on his own world. He did not look like a troublemaker. His clothes were simple and he walked with a steady, confident pace. At the same time, Officer Miller was patrolling the area. He was a tall man with a uniform that looked crisp but slightly worn. Miller had been on the force for years. Over time, he had started enjoying the power that came with his badge. He liked to show people that he was in control. Today he felt a bit arrogant. He had a long day and wanted to assert his authority. As Miller looked down the street, he noticed David. Something about the man caught his attention. Perhaps it was the calm way he walked, or maybe it was the phone in his hand. Miller decided to approach him. He strode across the sidewalk, his boots clicking against the pavement. "Hey you, stop right there!" Miller shouted. His voice was loud and commanding. David looked up, saw the officer, and nodded politely. He stopped walking but did not seem nervous. His calmness was unusual. Miller walked closer, trying to intimidate him. "Move aside. I'm talking to you," he said sharply. He assumed that David would react with fear or obedience. But David simply stepped to the side, keeping his phone in his hand, and said in a clear voice, "Of course, officer." "I am moving," Miller smirked. He thought the man was easy to handle. "Relax, don't make me repeat myself," he said. He leaned slightly forward, trying to dominate the conversation. David raised his head and looked directly at Miller. He stayed polite. "I understand, officer. I'm following the rules," he said calmly. His voice had no fear, only clarity. People walking nearby started to notice the interaction. Some slowed down to watch, curious about the situation. Miller did not like the calmness in David's voice. He expected people to be nervous, to apologize, or to react quickly. But David was different. Miller felt a slight irritation. His smirk faded into a frown. He wanted to assert his authority, but now it seemed harder than he expected. "Why are you walking so slowly?" "Huh?" Miller asked, raising his voice. "Do you think you are better than me?" David did not raise his voice. He stayed calm and replied, "I am just walking to my destination, officer." "I am not causing any problems." Miller shook his head. He had grown impatient. He decided to push further. He stepped closer to David, invading his personal space. "Do you think you can talk to me like that?" he said. "You need to listen to me." David did not move back in fear. He only adjusted his stance slightly and said, "I respect you, officer. I just want to continue peacefully." At that moment, David pressed a button on his phone. He was recording the interaction. Miller did not notice. David had learned to protect himself by staying calm and documenting situations. He believed that if he was always polite and steady, he could handle difficult people safely. Miller's face turned red with anger. He did not understand why David was not reacting like others. He had mocked, shouted, and tried to scare many people before, but none had remained calm like this man. The nearby crowd started whispering. Some were curious, some were annoyed by Miller's attitude. "Are you recording me?" Miller asked, finally noticing the phone. He tried to sound threatening. "This is not your business." David did not panic. He kept his voice calm and said, "I am just recording to make sure everything is clear. I am not doing anything wrong." Miller did not like this answer. He thought his badge gave him control over every situation. He had never been challenged so politely before. The calm confidence in David made him uneasy. People around were starting to watch more closely. Some began taking out their phones, quietly recording. They sensed that Miller was acting in a way that was unusual. David's calmness inspired others to pay attention. Miller realized that the situation was not as simple as he had thought. He had approached a man he believed would be scared, but David's politeness and confidence were shifting the energy around them. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Miller clenched his fists. He wanted to regain control, but he did not know how. David, on the other hand, remained composed. He kept his eyes on Miller without showing fear or anger. His calm demeanor created a quiet strength. He had learned that staying calm and respectful could diffuse tension while protecting himself. Miller tried to find words to assert authority, but every word he said seemed weaker against David's calm responses. He had mocked the wrong man. The afternoon continued with the sun shining above, people watching and David standing calmly. ready to handle whatever came next. Officer Miller took a deep breath, trying to calm his anger. He had never encountered someone who remained so polite and confident in front of him. David's calmness irritated him more than any shouting could. Miller looked around, noticing the few people who had stopped to watch. Some were recording the scene with their phones. Miller felt his control slipping. He decided to speak louder, hoping to scare David. "You think you can just talk to me like that? Do you know who I am?" His voice was harsh, but David did not flinch. He continued to hold his phone steady, recording everything. "I understand, officer. I am not trying to challenge you," David said. His tone was soft, but every word was firm. He spoke clearly, showing that he had nothing to hide. The words were simple, yet they carried a quiet power. Miller frowned. He did not like that the man was not afraid. He leaned slightly closer, hoping the proximity would intimidate David. "I am giving you a warning. You better listen carefully," he said. He expected David to apologize or move quickly, but David only nodded politely and took a small step back, respecting the personal space while remaining calm. David's calm actions confused Miller. He had always believed that fear and force were the easiest ways to control people, yet here was a man who did not react as expected. The crowd watching the scene seemed to notice this as well. Their whispers grew slightly louder. A woman walking by with a small child paused to watch. Her eyes were wide with curiosity. "Why is he so calm?" she asked quietly to the person next to her. Another man shook his head. "I don't know. Most people would be scared," he replied. David felt the tension, but he stayed composed. He knew that reacting angrily or shouting would only make the situation worse. He also knew that staying calm and polite could prevent the officer from acting recklessly. He had learned from past experiences that patience could be a stronger tool than confrontation. Miller's face was red now. He felt embarrassed that so many people were watching him struggle to intimidate one man. He clenched his fists and tried to appear strong. "I can call backup if I want. You have no idea who you are dealing with," he said. His words were meant to threaten, but they sounded more desperate than powerful. David responded evenly. "Officer, I do not want any trouble. I am just walking to my destination. I will stay here until you are ready to let me continue." He kept his eyes on Miller, showing respect while not giving in to intimidation. Miller's frustration grew. The officer had never had to face someone so polite and brave at the same time. He looked around again. Several bystanders were now clearly recording the incident. Some were whispering, but others were simply observing quietly. Miller felt the weight of their attention. "Why are you recording me?" Miller demanded. His voice was now sharper. "This is not allowed." He pointed toward David's phone. David smiled slightly, still calm. "I am recording to make sure everything is clear. I am not doing anything wrong, officer. I just want to make sure this interaction is safe for both of us." His words were simple yet firm. He did not argue and he did not mock. He spoke the truth clearly. Miller shook his head in frustration. He had thought that recording could be ignored, but now he realized that witnesses and evidence could work against him. He felt the first hint of worry. He had assumed that David would be nervous, but he was wrong. David's confidence was quiet, but it was stronger than Miller's shouting. The nearby crowd grew slightly larger. People passing by slowed down to watch. A young man leaned against a wall, recording with his phone. A middle-aged woman whispered to her friend, "That officer seems angry." The man is calm and polite. "It is strange." David stayed calm. He knew that losing patience could give Miller an excuse to escalate. He held his phone steady and continued to speak politely. "Officer, I will remain here peacefully. I hope we can resolve this calmly." Miller clenched his teeth. He had underestimated this man. Every attempt to scare David had failed. His threat sounded empty in comparison to David's calm strength. The officer felt himself losing control of the situation, and for the first time in a long time he felt unsure of what to do next. David's quiet confidence made the bystanders notice the difference. They realized that the officer was acting aggressively, while David remained polite and safe. This realization made some of them speak softly, questioning Miller's actions. Miller took a step back, trying to think of a way to regain control. His smirk had disappeared. He felt exposed in front of the crowd. David, on the other hand, remained steady. He did not move forward and he did not argue. He simply stayed calm and polite, letting his actions speak louder than any words. By the time a few minutes had passed, it was clear. Officer Miller's anger was growing. He could feel the tension in the air, and the crowd around them made him even more uncomfortable. He had never been challenged so politely in his entire career. Usually people would either apologize or react nervously when he raised his voice. But David was different. He was calm, polite, and steady. Miller decided to step closer to assert his authority. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "You think you can just talk to me like that? You better start showing some respect." His voice was sharp and his posture was meant to intimidate. David did not step back. Instead, he adjusted his stance slightly, keeping his feet firmly on the ground. He raised his phone a little higher to continue recording. "Officer, I respect you. I'm only asking to be treated fairly. I'm not doing anything wrong," he said in a clear, calm voice. His words were steady and confident. The people around them began to notice the difference. Some stopped walking to watch. Others quietly took out their phones, recording the interaction. David's calmness made them curious. They could see that he was not afraid, and that made Miller look smaller in comparison. Miller's face was red with frustration. He had thought that shouting and leaning forward would make David nervous. Instead, every action he took seemed to strengthen David's presence. He clenched his fists, trying to hide his irritation. "Why are you recording me?" Miller demanded, raising his voice again. He was losing patience. "You cannot record me without permission." David kept his voice calm. "I am recording so that everything is clear, officer. I am not hiding anything. I just want to make sure this interaction is safe for both of us," he said. His eyes met Miller's, steady and firm. Miller took a step back unconsciously. He realized that David's calmness was affecting the crowd. People were whispering now, and some were openly questioning Miller's behavior. One man in the crowd said quietly, "That officer is acting strange. The man is so calm." A woman added, "He is polite, but the officer seems frustrated." David noticed the attention but did not let it distract him. He continued to speak politely. "Officer, I want to resolve this without any trouble. I hope we can continue calmly." His tone was firm but gentle. Miller felt embarrassed. The officer had assumed that people would fear him, but now they were watching closely, seeing how he was acting. His reputation on the street was at risk. Miller had to regain control quickly, but he did not know how. He tried a different approach. "You think you are smarter than me?" "You better watch your words," he said. He attempted to sound threatening, but the words lacked the confidence they usually carried. David's calm eyes made Miller's threats appear weaker. David responded without raising his voice. "Officer, I am not trying to be smart. I am only asking for respect. I hope we can end this peacefully." Miller's jaw tightened. He had never encountered anyone who could remain calm while being challenged so strongly. Every second he tried to intimidate David, the man remained polite and composed. Miller felt cornered. The crowd continued to grow quietly. People were drawn to David's calm demeanor. They could see that he was not afraid, and it made them respect him. Some were ready to speak up if the officer crossed a line. The whispers became a quiet murmur of curiosity and concern. David's steady voice carried over the small crowd. "I am recording everything so that there is no misunderstanding. I hope this helps us both remain safe." His words were simple but meaningful. He did not insult or mock Miller. He stayed polite and logical, letting his calmness do the work. Miller felt his control slipping further. He realized that shouting and leaning forward would not work on David. Every attempt he made only made the man appear stronger in front of witnesses. His own behavior looked aggressive and unnecessary. David noticed Miller's hesitation and continued to remain calm. "Officer, I will stay here until you are ready to let me continue walking. I want to avoid any problems," he said. His voice was steady, showing patience and understanding. Miller's anger slowly turned into frustration. He had mocked the wrong man. David's calm presence had shifted the balance of the situation. The crowd could sense it, and Miller knew it. His arrogance had led him to underestimate someone who was quiet, confident, and polite. By now, the officer realized that escalating the situation would only make things worse. David was too steady, and the witnesses were too attentive. Miller had no easy way to regain his authority. He felt exposed and unsure, a feeling he was not used to. David remained patient, holding his phone and waiting for the officer to make a decision. His calmness was not just about patience. It was about strategy. He understood that respect, clarity, and confidence were stronger than anger. The afternoon continued with tension in the air. People around them remained quiet but observant. Miller's frustration was growing, and David's calm strength was becoming more apparent. It was clear that the officer had started a confrontation he could not easily control. David stayed steady, polite, and confident. He had not done anything wrong, yet he had shown the power of patience and respect. Miller realized, perhaps for the first time, that mocking someone could have consequences. David had turned what seemed like a simple encounter into a lesson in composure and courage. The street had grown busier as the afternoon went on. Cars passed slowly, and people walking by paused to watch the unfolding situation. David remained calm, standing straight and holding his phone steadily. His presence had an unusual effect. People around sensed that he was not afraid, and that made them curious and attentive. Officer Miller's frustration continued to build. He had tried shouting, leaning forward, and even threatening words, but nothing had worked. Every action he took seemed to make David stronger, not weaker. His patience was unnerving. Miller could feel that the small crowd of witnesses was beginning to judge him. Some whispered quietly, while others recorded the scene on their phones. Miller stepped closer again, hoping that proximity would finally intimidate David. "You think you are so clever, huh? You better answer me now," he barked. His voice was sharp, but David did not react with fear. "I'm not trying to be clever, officer," David said in a calm voice. "I am just asking for fairness. I want to make sure this interaction is safe for both of us." Miller's face turned red. His smirk from earlier had disappeared. He had never encountered someone who could respond with calmness, politeness, and confidence at the same time. Usually, people reacted with fear or anger, but David's steady demeanor made Miller feel uneasy. A few people in the crowd whispered to each other. "Why is he not afraid?" one asked. Another replied, "He is polite, but the officer looks frustrated. Something is wrong." Their observations made Miller even more uncomfortable. The officer had assumed he would control the situation easily, but that assumption was failing. David noticed a woman in a nearby cafe watching the scene closely. She seemed concerned and was holding her phone, ready to act if necessary. David nodded politely to her, acknowledging her awareness without losing focus on Miller. His calmness extended to the people around him, inspiring quiet courage. Miller tried a new approach. He reached for his radio, hoping to call backup. "I might need assistance here," he muttered, but he kept his voice low. The gesture, meant to assert authority, looked defensive. David noticed but did not react. He continued standing steadily, letting the officer's frustration show naturally. The small crowd had grown. More people had stopped walking, curious about the situation. Some whispered quietly, but others simply watched. Their attention added pressure to Miller. He was no longer just dealing with David. He was now performing in front of witnesses. David's calmness was deliberate. He understood the importance of patience. He knew that staying composed would prevent the situation from escalating and would allow the bystanders to clearly see the officer's actions. His hands were steady, his voice clear, and his eyes polite yet firm. Miller's frustration turned into embarrassment. He realized that his previous actions meant to intimidate had failed. The officer had assumed that mocking and threatening would control the man in front of him, but David's calm presence had reversed the dynamic. Miller was now the one under scrutiny. "Why are you still recording me?" Miller demanded, raising his voice slightly. He hoped the question would frighten David into stopping. "I am recording to keep everything clear," David replied calmly. "I am not hiding anything. I just want to make sure that both of us are safe." His words were simple, direct, and polite. Miller felt a sharp sting of defeat. His threats had no effect, and the crowd's attention reminded him that his actions were being noticed. David had turned a simple walk into a demonstration of patience, respect, and courage. Miller had no idea how to respond. Nearby, a young man whispered to his friend, "That officer looks angry, but the man is calm. It is strange." A middle-aged woman added, "He is staying polite, but I feel the officer is losing control." David remained steady. He did not shout, argue, or react angrily. His calm presence was growing stronger with every passing second. He understood that reacting with emotion could make the situation worse. Instead, his patience and politeness were his tools. Miller clenched his fists and shook slightly. He had mocked the wrong man. He had expected fear or submission, but David had done neither. The officer felt exposed, and the whispers from the crowd reminded him of his own mistakes. The street had grown noticeably quieter, but the tension between David and Officer Miller was rising. The crowd around them had increased slightly. People walking by paused, curious about what was happening. Some were recording with their phones, capturing every detail of the encounter. David remained calm, holding his phone steadily and standing straight. His calmness contrasted sharply with Miller's visible frustration. Miller tried to regain control. He took a deep breath and spoke louder, hoping to intimidate David. "I am giving you a final warning. You better listen to me. Do you understand?" His voice was sharp and demanding. David looked up and nodded politely. "Yes, officer. I understand. I am not causing any problems. I want to make sure everything remains peaceful and clear." His voice was firm but polite. His calm response seemed to frustrate Miller even more. Miller's face grew red. He clenched his fists and tried to think of another way to assert authority. He had always relied on fear to control situations, but David's calmness was making his usual tactics ineffective. The crowd noticed the tension. Some whispered quietly, questioning Miller's actions. Others continued recording, capturing the officer's aggressive behavior and David's composed demeanor. Miller decided to try a different tactic. He reached for his radio, intending to call for backup. "I might need assistance here," he muttered under his breath, hoping David would notice and feel intimidated. David did notice, but he did not react with fear. He simply kept his stance steady and continued recording. Nearby, a woman named Sarah, who worked at a small cafe, was watching the situation closely. She could see that David was calm and polite, while Miller appeared increasingly frustrated. She quietly took out her phone, ready to call someone if the situation escalated. David noticed her and nodded briefly, acknowledging her awareness. His calmness extended to the people around him, making them feel more secure. Miller tried to regain his authority verbally. "You think you can stand there and record me? That is not allowed." His voice was sharp, but his words sounded less threatening than he intended. David's calm voice responded clearly. "I am recording to ensure that everything is clear and safe, officer. I am not hiding anything, and I am not doing anything wrong." His words were simple, polite, and firm. The clarity in his voice made the bystanders notice the difference between his calmness and the officer's anger. Miller felt a twinge of embarrassment. The crowd's attention reminded him that his behavior was being observed. He had assumed that shouting and threatening would control David, but the opposite was happening. David's patience and composure were turning the situation against him. The whispers among the crowd grew slightly louder. "The man is calm, but the officer looks frustrated," one person said quietly. Another added, "It is strange. Usually people react when they are shouted at, but he is not afraid." The observations made Miller even more uneasy. David stayed focused on keeping the situation calm. He knew that reacting with anger or impatience could make things worse. Instead, he remained polite, confident, and steady. "Officer, I am only asking for fairness. I hope we can end this interaction peacefully," he said. Miller's frustration increased. He had mocked and threatened David, but nothing had worked. Every attempt to intimidate him only highlighted David's calm strength. Miller realized that he was losing control of the situation. A young man in the crowd whispered to his friend, "The officer looks angry, but the man is not afraid. He is calm and polite. It is unusual." The friend nodded quietly, adding, "People can see the difference. The officer seems to be losing control." Miller tried one more approach. He stepped closer and raised his voice, attempting to sound more commanding. "You better listen carefully, or I will take stronger action." His face was red and his hands were clenched. David did not flinch. He adjusted his stance slightly but remained steady. His calmness was now more noticeable than ever. "Officer, I hope no one gets hurt. I will stay here until we can continue peacefully. I want to make sure this situation remains safe for everyone," he said clearly. Miller's eyes flickered toward the growing crowd. He realized that his actions were being judged by witnesses. David's calm demeanor and polite words had given the bystanders confidence. They could see who was behaving responsibly and who was acting aggressively. Sarah from the cafe continued to watch, holding her phone, ready to call if necessary. Other people nearby were also quietly observing, sensing that Miller had made a serious mistake. David's composure had shifted the energy of the entire street. Miller felt trapped. Every attempt to intimidate David had failed. The officer realized that his arrogance had backfired. David had remained calm, polite, and firm, showing strength without anger. The situation was no longer simple. The officer had started a confrontation he could not control, and the witnesses were now an important part of the story. David stayed steady, holding his phone and maintaining his calm presence. He knew that patience and respect could prevent conflict and teach lessons without aggression. Miller, on the other hand, began to understand that mocking someone could have serious consequences. The encounter had already changed the way people were looking at him, and it was only going to get more difficult if he continued acting rashly. The street had grown silent except for the occasional whisper from the small crowd watching the encounter. David remained calm, holding his phone in one hand and standing with a steady posture. He knew that his patience and politeness were his strongest tools. Every second he stayed composed, the more the officer's frustration became visible. Officer Miller's face was red with embarrassment. He had tried shouting, leaning forward and using threats, but nothing had worked. David had not reacted with fear, anger, or disrespect. His calmness made Miller feel powerless in front of the witnesses. Every person watching could see the difference between David's steady behavior and Miller's aggressive actions. Miller took a step closer and tried to regain control with his voice.
You think you can just stand there and ignore me?
Do you understand what I am saying? He expected David to flinch or respond nervously. David did not flinch. He raised his phone slightly and said calmly, "I am listening, officer. I understand you want respect, but I am only asking to remain safe and clear. I am not doing anything wrong." His voice was polite but firm. The small crowd was beginning to grow. Passers-by slowed down, sensing that something unusual was happening. Some whispered quietly to each other, while others raised their phones to record. A few people glanced at the officer and then at David, noticing the clear difference in how they were acting. Miller's frustration grew. He clenched his fists and tried to think of a way to assert control. Every attempt he made to intimidate David only highlighted the man's calmness. He had expected fear or nervousness, but David's composure had turned the situation around. Nearby, Sarah, the woman from the cafe, was still watching. She held her phone, ready to call if necessary. She noticed that David was polite and steady, while the officer appeared increasingly aggressive and uncertain. She whispered to herself, "He is not afraid. That man is very calm." Miller tried another approach. He raised his voice higher, hoping to scare David. "I am telling you for the last time. Stop recording me or face consequences." David remained calm. "Officer, I am recording to ensure everything is clear. I am not hiding anything and I do not want trouble. I only want to make sure this interaction is safe for everyone," he replied. His words were simple, clear, and respectful. Miller's frustration began to show more than ever. He had mocked and threatened David, but nothing had worked. He felt trapped, realizing that the man in front of him could not be intimidated by shouting or threats. The small crowd of witnesses made the officer feel even more exposed. David noticed the attention from the crowd, but he did not let it distract him. He understood that keeping calm would allow witnesses to see clearly who was behaving responsibly. His steady posture and polite words had already shifted the energy around them. People were beginning to notice that the officer's aggression was unnecessary, and that David's patience was remarkable. Miller tried to take a more physical approach by stepping slightly closer, hoping proximity would scare David. But David adjusted his stance only slightly without showing fear. His calmness made Miller feel uneasy. He realized that every action he took was being watched, and that David's patience was turning the situation against him. The whispers in the crowd grew. "The man is standing calmly, but the officer looks angry," one person said quietly. Another added, "He is polite and patient. The officer looks frustrated." Their observations were making Miller more self-conscious. David spoke again in his calm voice. "Officer, I hope we can resolve this without trouble. I will stay here until it is safe to continue. I want to make sure the situation remains peaceful for everyone." Miller's jaw tightened. He could feel his authority slipping further. His arrogance had led him to believe that mocking someone would give him control, but he had been wrong. David's calm strength, clear words, and polite behavior were turning the encounter into a lesson that the officer could not easily ignore. David continued holding his phone steadily, recording the entire interaction. He knew that patience and respect could prevent conflict and show strength without aggression. Miller, on the other hand, began. By now, the street was full of curious onlookers. People walking by stopped to watch the unusual scene. Some raised their phones, quietly recording, while others whispered to friends about the situation. David stood calmly, holding his phone, his posture steady and his expression polite but firm. Every word he spoke carried clarity and calm strength. Officer Miller felt the weight of the crowd's attention. His frustration was visible, and his face was red with anger and embarrassment. Every attempt to intimidate David had failed. The officer had mocked the wrong man, and now he could feel the consequences of underestimating someone. "Do you think you can just stand there and record me without consequences?" Miller shouted, trying to regain control. His voice was loud, but David did not flinch. "I am recording to ensure everything is clear, officer. I'm not hiding anything, and I want to remain safe. I only hope the situation can be peaceful for everyone," David said. His tone was steady and polite, but the calmness in his voice carried a power that made Miller hesitate. The crowd noticed the contrast between the two men. David's calmness and politeness made Miller's anger appear exaggerated and unnecessary. People began whispering among themselves, observing carefully. "That officer looks frustrated." "The man is polite and calm," one bystander said quietly. Another added, "He is confident without being aggressive." "It is unusual." Miller tried to take another step forward, leaning closer in an attempt to assert authority. "You better listen to me now." "Do not test me," he shouted, hoping to intimidate David. David remained composed. He adjusted his stance slightly but did not move back in fear. "Officer, I am listening. I respect your position. I only wish to continue my walk safely. And I want this encounter to stay calm and clear," he said politely. Miller's frustration increased. He had mocked and threatened David, yet nothing had worked. The officer realized that the more he tried to show power, the stronger David appeared. The calmness and confidence of the man in front of him had shifted the balance completely. Nearby, Sarah, the woman from the cafe, observed quietly. She noticed David's calm demeanor and Miller's growing agitation. She was prepared to call for help if necessary, but continued to watch, noticing how David's politeness and steady presence influenced the crowd. Other witnesses were also paying close attention, recording the interaction and whispering observations to one another. Miller clenched his fists, his frustration turning into embarrassment. He could see that his actions were being documented, and the attention from witnesses reminded him that he could not act recklessly without consequences. David's steady confidence had taken control of the situation without raising his voice. David spoke again, maintaining his calm composure. "Officer, I will remain here until it is safe to continue walking. I hope that we can resolve this respectfully and without conflict." The small crowd began to quietly support David, not by confronting the officer, but by observing. Their attention made Miller even more uncomfortable. Every attempt to intimidate David was failing, and the witnesses were noticing the truth. David's patience and politeness had created a sense of authority that did not rely on aggression. Miller tried one final verbal threat. "You are testing me, and that is dangerous. You should think carefully about what you are doing." His voice was sharp, but the power in his words had weakened. David's calm expression and polite response made Miller's threats appear hollow. David replied calmly, "Officer, I am not testing you. I am simply asking for fairness and respect. I want this encounter to remain peaceful. I am not causing any trouble, and I hope you will allow me to continue safely." Miller's frustration reached its peak. He had mocked the wrong person, underestimated someone who remained calm under pressure, and now he faced a small crowd of witnesses recording his every move. His arrogance had backfired. The street was silent except for the quiet whispers from the crowd. David's composure had become the focus, while Miller's aggression drew attention to his mistakes. It was clear to everyone watching who was behaving responsibly and who was letting anger control their actions. Finally, Miller paused. He looked at the growing crowd, the phone's recording, and David's calm expression. He realized that escalating the situation further would only make him appear worse. For the first time that day, the officer hesitated, unsure how to regain control. David remained patient. He did not move forward, did not raise his voice, and continued to show respect and clarity. His calm presence had turned what could have been a dangerous confrontation into a moment of quiet strength. The tension on the street slowly shifted. Miller realized he had started a situation he could not easily control. David's polite confidence, steady voice, and composed presence had taken authority away from the officer without any aggression. The lesson was clear. Arrogance and mocking could have consequences when faced with calmness, respect, and courage. By staying patient, David had taught not only Miller, but also the witnesses an important lesson. Calmness and politeness could be stronger than aggression. The small crowd quietly acknowledged the strength in David's actions, and the officer understood, perhaps for the first time, the impact of his own behavior. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower, casting long shadows across the street. The small crowd that had gathered earlier had not left. People were still watching quietly, some holding their phones, recording the final moments of the tense encounter. David stood calmly, his posture steady, and his phone in his hand, capturing the interaction. Every word he spoke was polite and clear, yet carried quiet strength. Officer Miller's face was red, a mix of anger, frustration, and embarrassment. He had mocked David, assumed he would be intimidated, and now he was faced with a calm, composed man who refused to be provoked. The presence of witnesses only amplified Miller's unease. He realized that any rash action could make him appear unreasonable, and the recordings in the hands of onlookers could serve as evidence. "Do you understand what I'm saying? You need to listen to me carefully," Miller said, trying to regain control. His voice was firm, but the confidence behind it had faded. David met Miller's gaze politely and replied in a calm voice, "Officer, I understand you want respect. I am not challenging you. I only wish to continue walking safely. I hope we can resolve this peacefully for both of us." Miller hesitated. He looked at the crowd and then at David. The silence was heavy, broken only by the quiet murmur of whispers from bystanders. People could clearly see the difference between the two men. David's calmness and respect contrasted sharply with Miller's aggressive behavior. A few onlookers whispered to each other. "The officer looks frustrated, but the man is calm and polite." "It is unusual," said one person. Another nodded. "It is amazing how composed he is. The officer is losing control without realizing it." Miller tried again, leaning slightly forward and raising his voice. "Do you think standing there quietly will protect you? You better move carefully." David adjusted his stance only slightly and replied firmly, "Officer, I am not doing anything wrong. I am following the rules and staying peaceful. I hope you will allow me to continue my walk safely." The tension in the street was high, but David's calm composure created a sense of order. People began to step back slightly, giving him space while keeping their attention on the interaction. They could see that David was not afraid and that his patience and politeness were influencing the situation. Miller's frustration turned into self-awareness. He realized that every attempt to intimidate David had failed. The officer understood, perhaps for the first time, that mocking someone could backfire. David's quiet strength had shifted the power dynamic entirely. "Fine," Miller finally said, his voice less sharp than before. "You may continue, but be careful." His shoulders slumped slightly. He had lost the energy that arrogance and aggression usually gave him. The officer's realization of his own mistakes was clear, and the crowd noticed the change in tone. David nodded politely. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate it." He then slowly started to walk forward, still holding his phone and remaining composed. His calmness had prevailed without any conflict. The crowd followed quietly, observing as the encounter concluded peacefully. As David moved down the street, the atmosphere began to relax. Some bystanders whispered words of admiration. He stayed calm and polite. "That was impressive," one said. Another added, "He handled the situation without anger or aggression. He taught the officer a lesson without even raising his voice." Miller watched David walk away. He could feel the weight of the lesson he had learned. Mocking, threatening, or trying to intimidate someone who was calm, confident, and polite could lead to embarrassment and a loss of authority. He had faced someone who turned patience into power, and the experience was humbling. David continued his walk with steady steps, polite smiles to a few onlookers, and a sense of quiet confidence. He had handled a dangerous situation without fear, anger, or disrespect. His calmness had inspired others to see the power in patience and politeness. The crowd slowly began to disperse, carrying with them a lesson in human strength and respect. Witnessing David's composure had shown them that true strength often lies in remaining calm and polite, even when faced with aggression. Miller remained on the street for a moment, reflecting on the events. He knew that he had underestimated someone who,